Hello, everybody. This is the first part of a mini series that I'm going to be doing on DIY jump rings for jewelry design. I am going to go over the tools I have out here. You won't need all of these. These are a lot of them are just examples of things you can use around the house or things that you may already have in your jewelry toolbox that you can use for making these jump rings. Today is going to be focused on just the basic round jump rings. So today we're going to be needing a mallet, nylon mallet, and bench block, steel bench block, some flush cutters, some nylon jaw pliers. If you have them, great. These are the 6-stage or step bell making, loop making pliers. And if you happen to be in the hand stamping craft already, the mandrels, the round mandrels that have the stamp designs on them make great jump ring mandrels. Also, I raided my husband's toolbox, don't tell him, but screwdrivers, the metal shaft, all different sizes, great jump ring mandrels. This is also a bead making tool. It is a mandrel as well, and they are different stages graduating from small to large. You can pick these up in a pair. I actually carry them in our store. They're a very versatile tool as well, great for jump ring making. You may even already have them. And a very cheap alternative, I purchased a variety pack at Walmart for $1.19 of dowels, wooden dowels, and I got a 10, 8, 6, and 5 millimeter diameter dowels in the variety pack. Great for round jump ring making. So if you have some dowels laying around, great. Possibly might need a file or emery board just to take off any burrs the flush cutter might make. Also, simple wooden blocks come in handy for jewelry making. And hardening wire, flattening wire, if you don't have a bench block, great way to utilize these as for jewelry making. And I will show you this as we get into the tutorial, how to utilize the blocks of wood. And today we'll be using 16 gauge wire in brass, copper, and a copper core with a silver plating, which is a craft wire they'll sell, and also 18 gauge in the same tones, color tones. Now, I don't recommend going any smaller than 20 gauge for jump rings. Even 20 gauge is a little light, but I do understand that sometimes you need the thinner gauge metal in order to go through the delicate links of chain and such, or different components that might have very large holes. But as for connecting like bracelets and stuff like that, I really like to stick to the heavier gauges. They add more strength to your connections. And this is a sample of the variety of jump rings we'll be making today, all done with using the tools that I showed you previously. So we're going to start out with making a 10 millimeter in diameter jump ring, just using a round wooden dowel. Normally what I will do is I will hold the dowel in my non-dominant hand, which is my left, and I will hold the wire in my right, which is my dominant hand. I usually cut a section of wire that's in between 8 and 10 millimeter, or excuse me, 10 inches long. You can work off the spool if you choose, but you'll have to switch the positioning and put the dowel in the dominant hand and the wire, and turn the dowel rather than the wire wrapping the wire. If you're working off the spool, it'll make it much easier for you. So I will usually start with my thumb pressed against the wire, which will be pressed against the dowel that I'll be using as the mandrel. I leave myself a little bit of tail, so I have a little bit of movement and leverage as I'm wrapping. And then I will just use the strength of my fingers to begin wrapping the first coil around. And as I'm doing this, I'm keeping some tension on this wire that I'm wrapping. And I'm going to continue to wrap, keeping the coils snug against one another and following the natural curve of the dowel. And then I will take and finish off pushing with opposing directions, so I get the, and you can close this up with, and it will spring back a little bit, but you can close it up a little bit with the pressure of your fingers. But the most important part is that it's snug against that dowel there. And with round jump rings, it's easy to slide off any of the mandrels. When we get into the different shaped jump rings, I will let the wooden dowels and the softer material are not ideal for mandrels. So now we have a small coil of wire, and this is the 16 gauge copper core with the silver plated finish. Now keep in mind that you will not want to nick this coating because you'll see the copper underneath it. So I'll bring in the nippers and I will separate the coils enough that I can get the nippers in here safely without distorting the finish or nicking the finish. And I'm going to cut off this tail where it begins to curve. You don't want the straight portion. And then I'm going to flush cut towards the working coil. So I end up with a flush cut. That tail is going to be scrap. And I don't really mind having wire, when it's the cheap wire like the brass and the copper and craft wire, I don't mind having waste. If you're working with sterling, of course, you're going to more likely want to work off the spool. So now I'm going to flip the flush cutter so the flush side is towards the working wire, which when I say working, I mean the finished end. So now you're going to have, when I cut this, and I'm using my fingernail and finger to separate the coil so I do not nick the next coil when I make this flush cut. So now that is the first jump ring. And as you can see, you have two flush ends there by just simply finishing, flipping the flush cutters, and then you can close it. And then we'll cut another one, but we're going to cut our flush. We'll have to cut a flush in here. And then we're going to flip it. The flush cutters. So I have a flush in. I'm going to separate and I'm going to cut. And there's the second jump ring. I won't cut all of these just to save time, but that is as simple as it gets for making jump rings. And they're real easy to do, quick. You can, wrap up a small coil and make them. I make all my jump rings. Reason why I do that is because I don't like the store-bought ones for a couple of reasons. They usually make them in very light gauges that don't hold very well, and they don't flush cut both ends. Usually one end is pinched and they just don't look good. So it's really easy to make your own. And the jump rings are the glue that holds your jewelry together. And it's important that they look nice and they function as best as possible. Okay, and now I'm going to use a screwdriver mandrel. This is like a hobby pick that my husband had. But to show you how you can use stuff lying around the house, I'm going to grab a 18 gauge copper wire. And as you can see that I'm going smaller gauge because this is a smaller mandrel. When you're moving up in larger diameter in the jump rings, you'll want to move up larger in the gauge of your wire too for strength. If you made this at this large diameter out of an 18 gauge wire, it would not be nearly as strong. So we're going to do the same technique. So I'm going to bring the wire on top of the mandrel, my chosen mandrel here, and I'm going to take my thumb and I'm going to hold the wire and I'm going to begin the first wrap. Get it snug, gets the mandrel, and then as I bring the wire around, I'm wrapping it close to the coils here, keeping the coils snug against one another as I continue to finish off wrapping this piece of wire. First couple coils are always the hardest, but once you get going, they get a lot easier. And then I'll just use my finger to move it around. You can work this in as well. And then there you have it, and you can just slide it right off that mandrel. And then you'll bring in the flush cutters again, and we're going to cut off that straight tail where it begins to form that curvature that we want. Oops. Try to hold the pieces of your wire so they don't go flying like I just did. But sometimes it's a little harder. I wear glasses, so if you don't, you should probably wear safety glasses. I'm going to flip the flush cutters and come in here and flush cut the other side of the jump ring. Flip it flush cutters again so I have the flush against, separating the coils using my fingers so I'm not nicking the next jump ring as I cut. And you continue to go about this, just like I'm doing here, flipping the flush cutter so you're cutting flush cuts on both sides of the jump ring as you go. So now you have some smaller, and I'll tell you the diameter of these here by, if you have a calipers, you can check that. This is roughly 3 millimeters in diameter, and a nice strong jump ring made out of 18 gauge copper. Another tool that you can use are these. These are already tools that you can buy readily in craft stores or on Amazon or any other place online that carries jewelry making supplies. So this one's nice. I mean, you can't make a huge coil, but on the fly, if you're making jewelry and you're like, oh, I need a couple jump rings to finish off this bracelet and I don't have the right size. Well, this jump ring, this can be used to make 9 millimeter jump rings, 7 millimeter jump rings, 6, 5, I think 3 and 2.5 millimeter jump rings. So depending on the size you want, it can make it. And what I'll do is I'll do the 6. So I have a 18 gauge round brass wire here. And you're just going to start off making the coil. And you'll just continue. The reason why these make excellent jump rings is the barrels are all consistently sized to, each step is consistent in the diameter. Unlike round nose pliers where they taper. So you won't get consistently sized jump rings if you use those. So you can just continue to grab and twist like I'm doing here with my wrist. And then you have a nice coil of jump rings. And then you will take the flush cutters and cut your rings. But these are very handy because, as I said, you can get 6 different sizes with one pair of pliers. And these have all sorts of different uses. So this is a very good tool to invest in if you're looking to do that. And then you have, of course, these, which are basically the same thing. They just don't have the plier handles, but you can use it in the same way. And I will take 16 gauge copper wire here and show you how to do this one. I will go up here at the larger, and you'll do the same thing, and you'll want to keep in mind that you'll only go as far as the next step, or else you'll get a different size. And it's not as easy as the pliers. The pliers make it a lot easier. And then once you get it started, you can actually move the mandrel itself rather than the wire. So it makes it a little easier to twist this wire around. And when you're working with heavier gauge wire, it's a little harder to manipulate. But then you get the same effect, the same coil. And then you'll take your flush cutters and come in here and cut. And this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 10 different potential sizes of jump rings you can make with these 2 mandrels. And like I was saying, if you could use a stamping a punch as a mandrel as well, using the same technique of winding. So that is pretty much it for the simple technique of winding the jump rings around the mandrels. It doesn't take much, and as you can see, you can make quite a few jump rings in a short amount of time. Now, what I was talking about, as you can see, the impressions, I use these a lot for hardening wire. So if you don't have a bench block, you can salvage a couple pieces of wood. And what I'll do is I'll take the wire and I'll place it on one of the blocks, and I'll take the second block and I will press and roll. So if you have dead soft copper wire and you want to harden it to half hard, this is a way to do it. So you press and roll, and that will also straighten your wire. If you've got some bent wire that's really bent, this is a little bit more bent than that one. And craft wire too, you can do this with, because the wood will not mar it. It will straighten it. It will harden this because it's copper core as well. Press and roll, and then it'll straighten out your wire so it's nice, and any kind of like kinks or something that might have got into it, it'll straighten it out. So you can use these blocks to harden and straighten wire. And also, if you're making your jump rings and you want to flatten them out, or you want to harden them a little bit as well, like these are a larger, I want to say this is probably a 10, maybe 9. 8 millimeter jump ring made out of 18 gauge brass wire. So what I'll do is I'll place them there instead of hitting them with the mallet and having them fly off the bench block. I'll place them together, and I'll bring in the mallet, and I will just tap, and that will help round out any wonky jump rings, and it'll harden them. So there's a lot of good useful, and it doesn't mar the metal, which is a huge bonus. But you can use those 2 simple pieces of wood to straighten your wire, harden your wire, and flatten your wire. And also with bangles and such, you can do the same thing. It's just a kind of a helpful little tip for new jewelry makers if you don't have the bench block and the other tools quite yet, and you're not sure if you want to invest in all of that. So that is going to be it for this simple straightforward, basic jump ring making tutorial. I will be coming back with several tutorials on how to make different shaped jump rings and also textured and twisted wire jump rings. So look for those to be uploaded on our YouTube channel in the next week or so. I'm going to be loading 1 or 2 videos per week consistently. I might get up to 3, but no promises. And also I wanted to have take a moment to thank everybody for hanging in there with me as I learn this process too. And I hope my videos are getting better. I'm trying to shorten them by segmenting out the tutorials a little bit better. And I appreciate all the encouraging comments and all the likes and subscribers. Thank you guys, and I will be seeing you shortly.